Most World War II veterans today are dying at more than 1,000 per week. So their stories are going with them.
World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Adolf Hitler instructed his army to invade Poland. It was fought between two powers, the Axis powers, which included Germany, Japan, and Italy, and the Allied powers, which included England, the Soviet Union, China, France, and later the United States. Although the United States had been supplying the Allied powers with resources, they did not officially declare war until September 7, 1941, when the Japanese Air Force bombed the Pearl Harbor naval base. This was a total of 2 years after the war had begun. Just 4 short days after the United States declared war on Japan, Germany and Italy also declared war on the U.S. on September 11, 1941. When the United States deployed their first troop to Europe, they sent millions of men who had either volunteered or been enlisted. By the end of the war, the United States had sent over 16 million brave men to Europe and the Pacific for various reasons. Some men were sent to fight, some to rebuild the crumbling countries, and others were sent to save those who were caught in the path of destruction this war blazed around the world. It was not until April 30th, 1945, that the Allied forces finally reduced Germany's troops to ruins, and the German Führer, Adolf Hitler, committed suicide in his bunker. This left the remainder of the German troops to surrender on May 8, 1945. The Japanese forces, however, were still fighting. They continued to fight until the summer of 1945, when the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, one in Hiroshima and the other in Nagasaki. This forced Japan into surrender and officially ended the gruesome war on September 2, 1945. With the end of the war came great joy, yet also great sadness. The United States lost over 400,000 soldiers, while other countries lost many more. Much of Europe was in ruins, and the Japanese cities that had been bombed were decimated and left uninhabitable. Many of these cities took months and even years to rebuild and become safe to live in. Although the Second World War ended in 1945, its impact can still be seen worldwide today, almost 70 years later. Though the history of this war is known worldwide, new information is still being uncovered. The veterans of this war also have their own stories, stories that deserve to be told.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jona McKee, retired, and I'm just delighted that you would even consider your class asking me to talk about World War II. Just a shade over 18, I was drafted. That I'm still in your heart. It was just tailor-made for me because at that time, the mood of the country, everybody wanted to get involved. There was just war. A lot of fellows were joining the Navy, a lot of them joining the Army, Marines, Air Force. And by the way, the Air Force then was the Army Air Force. There was no just Air Force, it was the Army Air Force. And so I was drafted, went off to Fort Bragg. And from Fort Bragg, went to Scottsville, Illinois, where I did my basic training. Now, the mood and around Chicago and Illinois was that the soldiers were important, so they did a lot for us. They let us ride the buses free. On Sunday after church, some of the members occasionally would invite you out to the home and feed you. Put another chair there for... The uniform in that day, the uniform change in the military, was the Eisenhower jacket, sort of a bully willy uniform, tan, olive drab we call it, and boots, cap, and the duty uniform or the fighting uniform was fatigues. You have missed me too, but now we kept our rifle or pistol belt, which was affixed with a first aid pouch and ammunition. At that time, I entered the Army as a private, a recruit, and that meant that I had a slick sleeve, no stripes. But after basic training, after doing pretty good, we went off to advanced training. Now, advanced training was conducted at Scottsfield, Illinois. Then after the advanced training, we went to another advanced training after we had been reassigned to an engineer battalion. So I went to school and studied and became a heavy equipment operator. Cranes, turner pulls, and road graders. We became combat engineers and we built airstrips and roads as well as fight.
The star in the window took my place for a while.
From there we went to Spokane, Washington, where we got our field training. Just nothing but open field, and you graded, and when your instructor taught you how to level the earth and how to excavate it, and that was the bulldozer at that time that attached a turn pole on the back that was called a pan, and we built roads and airstrips with that.
Another place there for me.
The morale was very good, but sad to say, I have to tell you that during World War II we had two armies. One army was white and the other was black. Now the combination was this: we had black non-commissioned officers, white officers leading the unit, this 1883rd Engineer, which I was a part of. Well, that worked pretty good, but there was a lot of friction from time to time in these cities when the military police would pick our soldiers up and lock them up, beat them up. And they put us aboard a big ship called the USS Scout Your Victory. That was a warship that we traveled mostly then by ships. Now we travel mostly by plane. Very few troop ships, those were troop ships. They packed you aboard those troop ships. Most of the troops were down in the hold, uncomfortable positions in terms of sleeping and quarters, but we made it. We went on up to the North Pacific.
To you, my dear.
A mountainous island out there. Shimmy of the island that I was on, about 35 miles by seagoing tug or ship, a distance between here and Petersburg, Virginia. So we embarked there, and what was the weather like? Now, it's hard to believe that the weather in the Aleutian Islands, that's North Pacific, very cold and it's winter year-round. And we were rather ill-prepared clothing-wise to take on the weather. But we would survive because we were taught then, before we left the country, to dress in layers. And most of our uniforms were made of wool up there. Good thing it was, because if it had been like the tropical Vietnam, we would have burned up in those uniforms. Then we had to go over the uniform, we had the white parka that served as camouflage because there was snow and ice. And the minimum winds up in the Aleutian Islands all the time around 35, 40 miles an hour. And we traveled mostly in trenches. Trenches were dug, and there's very little soil as we know it, like outside there. But the soil up there is tundra, Tundra. We dug in. They shipped those round huts up there, and my unit, being an engineer unit, was responsible for excavating the tundra and building huts to sit down in there. After that, we were out of living on the natural earth, and we were living out of Quonset huts. That's that little round hut, and we'll hold about 2 or 3 squads, consisting of about 16 men. September, cold, but it's cold year round, so it didn't really make any difference. Ice, snow, winds, high winds, and we learned how to deal with the weather. We had 3/4-ton trucks. We had what they call a deuce-and-a-half truck would hold about a squad or more men with seats on the back.
I know that you've been blue and
From 8 to 5, we normally worked, and we were building an airstrip. Now, at the time, we were told that this airstrip was being built to for the Air Force to jump off to Japan. And as you know, we were preparing to drop the atomic bomb. But as it turned out, that was just a diversion.
the time will soon be here when
I can only identify two. One was a fellow who went to the same high school, Horatius Connie, who is now in California, and we get telephone calls about every other week and talk to each other. The other person is an unusual person, a Dr. Thigpen, who lives in Petersburg, and he was a second lieutenant. By this time, I had become a corporal.
place at the table has been empty so long.
There was a very popular song. Put another chair at the table. Set another table. Set another chair there for me. The time was drawing near when I'll be sitting there, back there where I belong. Put another chair at the table.
So put another chair at the table. Set another place there